Om Agana Timaranda Syanganangana Sarakya Chaksurun Meditam Yanatasmai Sigurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sapitam Yada Bhutare Swayam Rupakaramayam Darati Swaparandikam Vandeham Sri Guru Siyata Parakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sya Sri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sadevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shivishikan Vitam Stam Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutare Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Sarasati Devi Guru Anipacharine Nirvishesa Sunyavadi Praskata De Sarani Narayanam Namaskritam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jehodire Nishta Pariyashu Bhadresu Nityam Bhagavata Seva Bhagavati Atamashoki Bhakti Bhavati Naistaki Nigamaka Paduragari Padam Shukamakaramita Dravi Samitam Pibata Bhagavatam Rashamadam Mahora Hora Shikabhuvakam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Siddhi Gaur Bhaktavindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Welcome to Motivational Monday, coming to you from Spanish Fork, Utah. We're still having problems with the virtual background eating the speaker, taking chunks out of his periphery. So you've got our screen as the background today. We'll see what we can do. It's an ongoing saga. Good morning, Raleigh. Good morning, Rupa Manjari, Jimmy and Taruni. Thank you all very much for joining us on this beginning day of a new week. And if and when Prashad joins us, maybe you guys could, in the comment section, congratulate him and his wife on their new initiated names over the weekend. They had an online initiation from Gopal Krishna Maharaj, and Prashant's new name, if I've gotten it right here, is Pradyumna Narayan. Make a note of that, Pradyumna Narayan. And his wife Sachi's initiated name is Shushila Sita. All right, we can congratulate Prashant if he comes on board this morning to give us those links to the various quotes that we use. And the first quote is the one that we've been, good morning, Anjali. Hare Krishna. Welcome to MM. We're back again for the 43rd verse, 3rd chapter, first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Such a significant verse. We're squeezing everything out of it that we can. Krishna Swadam Upagate Dharmagan Karona Vishamasha Paranako Dunodita. The Bhagavad Purana is as brilliant as the sun, and it has arisen just after the departure of Lord Krishna to his own abode, accompanied by religion, knowledge, etc. Persons who have lost their vision due to the dense darkness of ignorance in this age of Kali shall get light from this Purana. We mentioned Chanaka Shloka 34 last Wednesday, which says, Ayusho Shano Ekopi Na Sharna Kotabhihi. The duration of life, especially in the human form, is extremely short. The Moody Blues had a song. It wasn't their most popular song. It's probably their most least popular song, but maybe one of their most informative songs, called 22,000 Days. And that's the average lifespan in the human form of life. I don't know how that translates into weeks and months and minutes and all. I think women live an average of 77 years. Men live an average of 72 years. And half the time we spend sleeping, half the time we spend in infancy. 20 years we spend, 10, 15 years we spend in infancy. 10, 15 years at the end we spend in invalidity. 20 years we spend raising kids. How much time do you spend eating? You take all that out, and you really have very little left. And Chanaka says you cannot turn the clock back even 1 second were you to offer millions and millions of gold coins. You can offer 10 million, 20 million gold coins, and you cannot make it, I don't know what it is right now. Right now, according to my iPad, it's 7:34, okay? So no matter how much we offer to pay, assuming we had it in the first place, we can't make it 7:33. But what do we conclude from that? That even 1 minute of our time is more valuable than all the money that we can earn throughout many, many, many lifetimes. And if you spend even a minute in Krishna consciousness, that will be such a great asset that it can't compare to any material achievement. The beauty about spiritual advancement of Krishna consciousness is that it's imperishable. It never erodes, it never atrophies, it never goes away. It's always an asset that stays with you. Probably gave the example, in material endeavors, you have to go all the way. You have to follow the whole course to its very end in order to achieve what's called success. And even then, the fruits are temporary. For instance, if you want to become a doctor, you have to go through primary school, secondary school. You have to take medical courses during the undergraduate years. Then you have to go to medical school. And then you have to intern. We're talking 16, 20 years of schooling. And if you drop out at any time, let's say you go 15 years and then you drop out, then the whole endeavor is a waste of time. And even if you become a doctor, it's just a temporary advantage in terms of the standard of living that you enjoy during this one lifetime. On the other hand, Krishna says in the 40th verse of the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, good morning, Jayashri, Ram Kishore, Bear, is that how you pronounce it? Bear? You can write in the comments with any appropriate accents so that if I'm mispronouncing it, I can correct myself. Naiha brikama nasasi pratyavaya navidyate shravam piyasya dharmasya trayata matobayat. Shravam api asya dharmasya means even, in the material field, you spend so much time to get a degree, to get a job, to pursue your career, and yada, yada, yada. It's all finished. Time of leaving this body, any assets that have accrued to this body are also finished. On the other hand, even a little bit of advancement, Hare Krishna. Someone says, Hare Krishna, or they even see the devotees out in a public place, and they appreciate them. Or devotees have been going up and down Oxford Street in London for over 50 years, 2 or 3 hours every afternoon with a big kirtan party, bass drums, accordions, sometimes violins. It's a really wonderful, exuberant presentation. And if you go on YouTube and you see any of those videos, you'll see people from all over the world. Tourists come from all over the world. Oxford Street, it was once the seat of empire. And people from all over the world, they join the kirtan just spontaneously, sing and they dance and raise their arms. That's an eternal asset for them. Even if it only gives them a tiny mite of Krishna consciousness, it's imperishable. Whenever they resume, they'll start from where they left off. So it says, Mahato Trayate Bayat. One thing is that any small progress in Krishna consciousness will save you from the great danger of taking birth as a less than human in the next body. Or should you take birth as a less than human like Bharat Maharaj, he had a special concession that he retained his memories of his Krishna conscious practice in the human form. Whatever form you're in, and if you do a little Krishna conscious in this life, it's not likely that you're going to de-evolve. It's not likely that you're going to find yourself in an animal form in the next life. But whatever form you take birth, you can easily revive your Krishna consciousness and continue from where you left off. Prabhupada says material activities and their results, material activities and the results, and with the body. But work in Krishna consciousness carries a person again to Krishna consciousness even after the loss of the body. What material endeavors can that be said for? In the 21st verse, the 6th chapter, the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Matir Mayi Navadiyam Navipadyata Karichit Prajasharga Nurodepi Shmita Chadada Nugrahat. The Lord himself is speaking to Narada Muni. And he says, Matir Mayi. Matir means consciousness. Mayi means consciousness of me. So Krishna is speaking to Narada Muni. And he says, Matir Mayi Navadiyam. Consciousness of me, Krishna consciousness, Navipadya de Parichit. It cannot be destroyed or thwarted at any time. Prajasharga Nurodapi Shmitash Tamad Anugraha. That even at the time of annihilation, let's say you're not 100% Krishna consciousness at the time of the next cosmic annihilation. After cosmic annihilation, it says, Sahashi Yuga Payanta Mahayad Brahmadu, Yatram Yuga Sahasram Teo Ratu Vidarjanam, Bhuta Grama Saeva and Bhuta Bhuta Ratu Magavisa Prabhavati Aragami. From the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. It says the creation is coming and going according to the inhalations and the exhalations of Mahavishnu. Now, one exhalation is 311 trillion years. And after a period of manifestation of 311 trillion years, then the Lord inhalates and the whole creation is destroyed. And it rests within the Lord in a somnambulant state for another 311 trillion years. And then he exhales again, and again it manifests. So the living beings, whatever it was they were doing during the previous creation, they were obviously interrupted by the devastation of the universal system. So, but when they're again manifest, when the Lord glances upon the newly manifested creation after a period of 311 trillion years of dormancy, the living beings who had progressed in Krishna consciousness in the previous creation, 311 trillion years ago, retain their Krishna consciousness. How is that possible? How can you remember something that happened more than 311 trillion years ago? And the answer is given here, Shmita Chamad Madanugrahat. By the grace of the Lord personally ensures that he preserves whatever measure of Krishna consciousness that you practiced even in the previous creation. So there's no loss and the gain is very great. I remember when I was president of Berkeley one time, one afternoon, one lazy afternoon, devotees were all in Sankirtan. I was doing some office work and a visitor came into the lobby. He was a young man, maybe late 30s, 40. And he told me an extraordinary story. I forget what his name was. But he had been just a couple of weeks in the New York Temple. And this might have been even back when they had the storefront. I'm not sure which version of the temple it was or exact year, but it was in the late 60s. And this would have been 76 or so in Berkeley, California. He had been just in the temple for a couple of weeks, got up early in the morning, chanted his japa, attended Mangalarti classes, did the whole thing for a couple of weeks, and then he just couldn't stand the discipline anymore, and he left. So you could hardly say that he had a serious run at Krishna consciousness. You know, he was enamored with it, infatuated with it, followed up on it, but then backed off, you see. So Arjuna asked this question, Kacha nobe vibhashtas, in the 6th chapter, Chanabam vibanasati apatisto mahabhavo yeyam dari. He says, what happens to someone who takes a run at Krishna consciousness but didn't have enough seriousness and determination beforehand to carry them through, and so after some time they retreated, they backed off. Arjuna says they lost that time in terms of material education and vocation and earning. So they lost some time in the rat race. They lost some distance. They fell back from the pack while the time they spent in the temple. And they didn't complete Krishna consciousness. They didn't proceed into Krishna consciousness very far. What's their position? They're neither here nor there. Are they lost? Arjuna asks Krishna. He gives a nice example. Sometimes from a big mass of clouds, a tiny bit of cloud will separate itself from the whole. And because it's small, it becomes permeated more and more by air. So as you watch, that tiny cloud kind of just evaporates. It disappears, so to speak. So it's no longer a cloud, it's air. Arjuna says, does not a person perish like a ribbon cloud with no position in any sphere? In other words, one is separated, cut oneself off from the body of devotees, from the practice of Krishna consciousness, then does not one have no position in any sphere? Is he not ruined? And then Krishna says, Tato tambudi samyagam labate purvate yatato chatato samsido kudanandana. No, whatever progress they've made is retained, and they can resume their practice of Krishna consciousness later on and finish up at that time. this fellow, we sat down, we had a little chat. We were the only ones in the temple. He said he'd been in the temple for a couple of weeks and just couldn't hack it. So here's his story. He went out, finished his college or whatever, got a job with NBC as a newscaster, and decided and went into war zones. He reported on wars. So there was a war between Israel and the Arab states. I think this is 1969. And he found himself in the desert there, hunkered down with his cameraman behind a sand dune. And they were just sticking their heads up, and the cameraman was filming some of the rockets and some of the tanks and some of the infantry fighting. And he stuck his head out to the side of the cameraman, and he was getting sound bites of the shooting and the explosions and all. And he just, when it happened, he didn't have to see it. He felt it. The head, sorry for the gruesomeness here this early on Monday morning, this early in the week, but the head of the cameraman just turned into droplets of red. It became hovering droplets of red, and his head was gone. And this fellow who had done a little Krishna consciousness told me that he was sure he was going to die. He was sure he's going to die. His first reaction was horror. That all of a sudden his friend and his associate had no head, nothing but droplets of blood hovering for a moment in the air before falling into the sand. And he knew he was next. He said his exact words were he felt as if death was a membrane in the air, that death had definitely come for him. And his initial reaction was horror at what had happened to his friend and fear, but he told me the most extraordinary thing happened. He felt, rather than fear, rather than panic, he felt, okay, my time has come. I know what to do. And he just started chanting right there in the desert, in the middle of the war, with his headless friend prone beside him. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And obviously he didn't die, or he wouldn't have been in the lobby of the Berkeley Temple telling me this story. And I don't know if he will be so fortunate as to recall Krishna the next time he faced death. But I always remember that story as a wonderful example, wonderful testimony about how even a small amount of Krishna consciousness can save one from the greatest danger. 2 weeks in the temple under the most intense pressure of violence, a nightmarish situation, and he was able to go within himself, stay in peace, chant the holy names, and meet what he felt was inevitable death with equanimity. And I can only hope that when he actually died, he may not be dead yet, but that was 50, 60 years ago, so there's a good chance that he actually died. He had the same recall, that Krishna blessed him with the same reminiscence, the same recollection of his Krishna consciousness. We could go at any time, so always be ready. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Now that was an example of someone who was not fully Krishna conscious getting a huge benefit, sidestepping what was potentially a great danger, just on the strength of having performed a small, tiny amount of Krishna consciousness. Very much a neophyte, but getting major benefits from that. Now, when this verse talks about even a little Krishna consciousness or a moment's Krishna consciousness being of great potential asset to one, there are also stories of advanced devotees, 100% Krishna conscious devotees, who were able within a moment to make their lives perfect and surrender into the Lord. Of course, you know right now that the prime example of that is Bali Maharaj. He was a demon. He didn't have good birth. He didn't have aristocratic background. He was the king of the demons. They had usurped the higher planets of the demigods after a great war. His followers were not pious devotees of the Lord, just the opposite. But he himself was a grandson of the great Prahlad Maharaj. You recall that Nrsingadev had benedicted Prahlad that previous and future generations would all be Krishna conscious. So when Vamanadev, the Lord, appeared before Bali Maharaj in the dwarf form to wrest away all of the conquered lands from Bali and restore them to the demigods, essentially to cheat Bali, Bali was not at all nonplussed. He was not frustrated or put out by that. He could have said, I worked so hard, I risked my life to conquer the heavenly planets, and who are you to come and whisk it all away in a moment? He recognized that in that moment, when he had a choice to surrender or not to surrender, was his greatest opportunity. This is one of the things he said in his conversations with the dwarf incarnation. Yadi Uttamashoka Bhavan Mamaritam. This is the second verse, 22nd chapter, 8th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. We have joining us someone who was formerly named Sachi Saraswat, but whose new name is Susila Sita. You're welcome to welcome her and congratulate her. She's joined us. I don't know where her husband, Pradyumna Narayan, is yet, but perhaps he'll jump on board later. So anyway, I give the verses, the chapters, and the cantos in case Prashant or Pradyumna is there and he wants to post the links. Yadiyo tamashoga bhavan mameritam bachovi rikam sarivariman karome ritam tane bhaved pralan bam padam tirtim kurushnishni me mitam. Bali Maharaj said to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he said, most worshipper of all the demigods, if you think that my promises become false, I shall certainly rectify matters to make it truthful. I cannot allow my promise to be false. Please, therefore, place your third lotus footstep on my head. He had granted Vamana, the little dwarf Brahmin, 3 steps of land. As soon as those words came out of his mouth, Vamana expanded himself, and with his first step, he claimed the earth. With his second step, he claimed the whole universe from upper, middle, and lower planets. Bali had conquered all that, and with his second step, Vamana got it all back. He retrieved it on behalf of the demigods. So now Bali is homeless, penniless from having conquered the universe. Now he's got nothing. So what does he do? Does he fall apart? Does he freak? Does he vent his frustration? Does he talk about how unfair it is and have a pity party? No, he recognizes that now is a pivotal moment. In fact, not only has he lost everything, but Vamanadeva is standing before him saying, you promised me 3 steps of land. I've taken everything with 2. Now what are you going to do? And there's nothing worse than having made a promise and not being able to fulfill it. There's a special hellish condition for those who make promises and do not follow through on them. So basically, Vamanadev is threatening Bali with the worst kind of karma, the worst kind of retribution, even after he's surrendered everything that he worked so hard for. Put yourself in that kind of a situation. Would you be calm? Would you be poised? Would you be excited? Would you recognize this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? Because Bali did. He's one of the Mahajans, one of the 12 great authorities on Krishna consciousness, and he achieved that exalted position in a moment. The window opened. He didn't hesitate. He didn't hold back. He jumped through the window of opportunity, and he said, Lord, you've taken all of my possessions, and now you're asking what I have to give. This is good thinking on your feet, I think you'll have to admit. It's not like, He said, you've taken all my possessions, And now you've accused me of not having anything to give. But can I propose to you that the possessor is more important than the possessions? I remember in the 80s in Los Angeles, when cassette players were the main method of communication, one devotee had purchased a series of success cassettes from an entrepreneur named Glenn W. Turner, and those got passed around. Glenn W. Turner had a cleft palate, so he spoke kind of funny with a little bit of a lisp, and he talked about how that one needed to go bankrupt at least 7 or 8 times before one could get everything exactly right, make millions and millions of dollars, and not then lose them. And he told in detail about the first $1 million that he made and lost, and the second $1 million that he made and lost, and the third $1 million that he made and lost. And his point was he was learning in all of this, not only how to make it, but make it in such a way that it doesn't go away, that it stays with you. And only after losing and gaining and losing $1 million about 7 times did he actually then chalk out a program where he then became worth $30 or $40 million. And I thought that the point, whether he realized he was making it or not, was that you can make and lose $1 million, but you can then regain it. Therefore, the possessor who can bounce back and recoup, who has the skills and the knowledge and the smarts, is not frustrated when there's a reverse or a setback. They have the skills to then bounce right back and earn not only the amount of money back that they lost, but 10 times that much. Following this line of reasoning, Bali asked the Lord, "Lord, do you not agree with me that the possessor is more important than the possessions?" He said, "I lost the whole universe, but I gained it once, I could gain it again, isn't it?" The logic is irrefutable. Therefore, Lord, by way of countering your claim that I have nothing more to give you that's of any value, I actually assert that I can now give you the most valuable thing, which is not possessions, but I'll give you the possessor. I'll give you myself. And at that point, he asked the Lord to put his feet on his head, which in our Vedic culture is a sign of surrender. Francis Havergal, the greatest bhakti poet in Christendom, said this, wrote this: "Take my life, Lord, and let it be consecrated to thee. Take my moments and my days, let them flow in ceaseless praise. Take my hands and let them move at the impulse of thy love. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for thee. Take my lips and let them sing always only for my King. Take my mouth and let it be filled with messages from thee. Take my silver and my gold, not a mite would I withhold. Take my intellect, use every power as thou shalt choose. Take my will and make it thine, it shall be no longer mine. Take my heart, it is thine own, it shall be thy royal throne. Take my love, my Lord, I pour at thy feet its treasure store. Take myself, and I will be ever only all for thee." This is Atma Nivedanam. Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu Shmaranam Panasevanam Archanam Vandanam Dasyam Atma Nivedanam. Surrendering everything, even one's own self, to the Lord, as personified and epitomized by the great Bali Maharaj. And you know, an interesting thing was his own guru, Sukracharya, had been instructing him, pressuring him not to give Vamana the boons. Sukracharya intimated that there was more to Vamana than meets the eye, and he mistrusted Vamana. So he conveyed to his disciple, if you want to retain the possessions that you worked and fought so hard for, you should not agree to give this pygmy Brahmin 3 steps of land. My feeling is that if you go along with this, he will cheat you out of everything. And that's what happened. But when you're cheated by God, it is your greatest good fortune. In that moment, when Bali had a decision to make, he offered himself. He'd already given his possessions. But then you can give your possessions, but hold yourself back. Bali didn't. He surrendered everything, including himself. In this moment, he made his life successful and set an example for all of mankind for millenniums afterwards. And therefore, it said in the second canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, first chapter, 12th verse, Kim pramata shabahubi prokse harinam varam varam mahortim biritam gadate suryasayata. Stoka Krishna, I don't know where you were, but welcome back. Thank you very much. And I got your message, your address, so I can send you a calendar as well. Anjali is congratulating Prashant and his wife Sachi on their initiation and their new names, as is Kishore. Thank you very much for supporting and congratulating the other members of this forum on their having stepped forward on the devotional path. Here's the verse. Kim pramatasya bahubhya prokshaya varam mahortim viditam gadate shreyase yataha. What is the value of a prolonged life in this world, asks Sukadeva Goswami, which is wasted inexperienced by years? Better a moment of full consciousness, because that gives us want to start in searching after his supreme interest. Prabhupada says, such activity, that moment of surrender on the part of Bali Maharaj, is never to be compared to a prolonged life of ignorance, like the life of the trees and other living entities who may live for thousands of years without prosecuting spiritual advancement. With all the advancements of medical science, diagnostics that we have nowadays, we've increased the lifespan of living beings. We generally live a few years longer these days than we did 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But a lot of that is simply inflated by machines that, even though the quality of life is zero, they can successfully prolong the quantity of life. But what difference does it make, even if you live thousands of years like some trees, and there's not a moment in there of Krishna consciousness? And when you die, it's simply a life that has been wasted, a life in which you have been defeated so far as fulfilling the purpose that you're here for. In the 18th verse, third chapter of the second canto of Bhagavad Gita, Tadava kim na jivanti, bashta kim na shishanti yasha, nakadanti na mehante, kim grame pashavo pare. Sukadeva Goswami goes on to illustrate this point. He says, do the trees not live? And someone may say, well, the trees, yeah, they live, but they don't breathe. We're different from the trees in as much as we breathe. And then he asks, Kim Bastra Shashanti, don't the bellows in the blacksmith shop breathe? Or when you're playing the harmonium, doesn't the harmonium breathe as you pump it? And then they say, okay, well, all right, but the trees don't move around and have sex life and produce families and things like that. But then it says, do the beasts, do the dogs and cats not also eat and discharge semen? So what is the unique prerogative of the human form of life? If we're not stepping into the purpose for which we're put here and created, why prolong a life which has no value and which has no use? The reason that people opt for focusing on the body and the prolongation of this span that we have here in this present lifetime is because they have no information of the next life. Say you have an old car, it's got cracked windshield, it chugs as you move along, shudders and shakes, there's a big clouds of black exhaust that come back from the rear of it. How long would you want to drag on driving a car like that? The experience is unpleasant, it's smelly, it's dangerous, it's slow, it's a toss-up as to whether it's actually going to get you to where you want to go. Long before that point, you would have started thinking about getting a new car that has a smooth running engine, that doesn't smell bad, that goes at least 60, 70 miles an hour, that performs as expected, as it was manufactured to expect. So when a new body awaits you, and I mean, even if you're a materialist, whatever material appetites, desires, and ambitions you have, you can ill fulfill them in an old, decrepit body. According to God's arrangement, even if you're a materialist, there's a system whereby you can better fulfill your material desires, and that involves a change of bodies. It's like when your car gets old and you feel inhibited and limited by your old clunker, you want to trade it in to get a better functioning, a better performing car. So in the same way, we should understand that even from the materialistic point of view, it's a very good system to discard the old body in favor of a new body. Vasamsi jirnani yatavi haya navani grinati naropanani tatasirani vihanti anyati samyati navani dehi. We've been joined now by Prashant Saraswat, whose initiated name is Pradyumna Narayan, and true to form, he's throwing up our quotes one after another. Congratulate him. You see, Pradyumna, all the congratulations before you came on board. I told everyone about your recent initiation, so they're very, very happy for your having taken that step forward in your spiritual life. Prabhupada said, this ignorance about the eternality of the living being, the ignorance about the availability of another new, fresh, newborn body after the expiration of this one, has played havoc in the structure of modern human society. Prolongation of life has no value if you're not exercising the function for which you're put here. Prabhupada said there's a tree in Vrindavan at a place called Imlitala, where there's a tree that is said to have existed since the time of Lord Krishna. That means, although it's undocumented, the assertion is that the tree is over 5,000 years old. I did a little Wikipedia research on trees that have been with us for a long time, and if you're willing, I can share that information, share the results of that research with you. There are many trees that have been 4,000 or 5,000 years documented, but they're mostly passed on by now. Of the ones that are still alive, the oldest documented tree is a bristlecone pine tree in the California White Mountains. People call it, not surprisingly, Methuselah, and this tree is documented to be 4,852 years. There's a cypress tree in Chile, which is the oldest one that had ever been planted, a cypress tree in Chile, which is 3,649 years old. Now, the oldest tree that has been planted by a human hand is a tree called the Jaya Sri Maya Bodhi tree, which is 2,265 years old. That was planted by the granddaughter of Emperor Ashoka in 245 BC, and it was planted from a sapling of the original Bodhi tree, which Buddha sat under. Now, another name for the Bodhi tree is the peepal tree or the Ashwatthama tree, which is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. And if you'll recall, prior to leaving the planet, prior to departing from the world, and this verse here is Krishna Swadhamapagate Dharmagavini Saha. When Krishna left the planet and went back to his own abode, taking with him knowledge, religion, etc. So, as you recall, just prior to Krishna's leaving the world, he sat with his back to a people tree. And that people tree, Prabhupada explains in the purport, is representative of this universe. He was turning his back on the material universe, preparing to go back home, back to Godhead. So that Ashwatthama tree, or that people tree, represented the universe which Krishna was leaving. Now in the Bhagavad Gita 15th chapter, first verse, this material world is described, Urdvam mulamadashakam ashatam pray abhyam chandamsi yashapurnami yashtam veda saveda vit. It is said that there is an imperishable banyan tree, or Ashwatthama tree, that has its roots upward and its branches down, and whose leaves are the Vedic hymns. One who knows this tree is the knower of the Vedas. Now, where in nature do we find a tree with its roots up and its branches down? We don't, except insofar as the real tree is reflected on water. The reflection of a real tree on water has its branches down and its roots up. And just at that pivotal point where the water's a horizontal plane of 180 degrees above and 180 degrees behind, is Lord Brahma, the creator of the material universe. So before Lord Brahma is the unreal world, the world which has no reality in and of itself. The upside down tree has no reality except what it gets from the right side up tree on the bank of the river. So this material world, which we take for being real, is in fact a reflection of the spiritual world. Now, in this material world, there is all kinds of variety. There are poems all about nature and sunrise and sunsets and the moon and the sun and oceans and mountains and rivers and waterfalls and palm trees. And there are many, many artists, landscape artists throughout the ages that celebrate the variety and the beauty within this material world. But all of that is just a reflection of the variety and beauty which originates in the real world, the world with its roots down and its branches up, which is the spiritual world. That's the upper 180 degrees. We're in the lower 180 degrees. So the perfection of our life as spirit souls, part and parcel of God, is to get out of the lower 180 degrees and into the upper 180 degrees. The purpose of life is not to prolong your stay in illusion. If it's an illusion, why would you want to stay there any longer than is minimally necessary? This is a kind of this is especially unflattering example referring to the material world, but it might make the point even more vivid to you. Bhaktisiddhanta said, this material world is like an outhouse. Compared to the spiritual world, the variety, the beauty here is pale in comparison and minuscule compared to the beauty and the variety which exists in the original world, of which this world is only a perverted reflection. So compared to the spiritual, you may say, well, that's not very charitable to describe this world with all of its assets and attractive, enchanting features as an outhouse. But actually, it's 100% active compared to the superiority of the spiritual world. This material world is like an outhouse. And what do you do with an outhouse? You don't go in there and make a permanent arrangement. You don't do that. You don't put in shelves with foods and a little cooker stove, and you don't have a place to sleep there. I mean, come on. The outhouse, you go in, you do your business as fast as possible, and you get out. We're eternal spiritual worlds. We're part of the kingdom of God. So why would we want, having come here and accepted a material body of flesh and blood and stool and urine, and having consequently limited our freedom, conditioned ourselves to birth, death, disease, and old age, why in the world would we expend energy and resources to prolong our stay in this material world? Is the value of the life of trees like Methuselah, which is almost 4,000 years old, 5,000 years old, the cypress tree in Chile, or even the Bodhi tree, which was planted from a sapling of the tree under which Ashoka lived, are those more important than Ashoka? Is the Bodhi tree more important than the Buddha, who solved the problem of suffering and reincarnation underneath the tree? Is the Methuselah tree more important than, say, the life and the contribution of Sankaracharya, who lived only 32 years? Is any tree, no matter how long-lived it is, more important, more insignificant as far as our options and our potentialities are concerned than the life of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was only on the planet for 48 years and propagated the Sri Krishna Sankirtan. Cheto Darpanam Arjanam Babadavagni Nirvapanam Sriya Kaivara Vichandikadanam Vijabadu Jivanam Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam Pratipadam Pranamritashvaranam Sarvat Mashnapanam Param Vijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtananam. All glories to the Sri Krishna Sankirtan, which cleanses the heart of the dust accumulated for years altogether. It gives us a taste of that nectar for which we are always anxious. And that is credited to the descent of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who only lived 24 years in Bengal, and then the last 24 years of his life he spent in Jagannath Puri, worshiping Lord Jagannath. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was a young man. He didn't prolong his sojourn in this material world. Sankaracharya was a young man. He did not prolong, he did not drag on in a material body in this material world. Bali was not an aged, decrepit man. He was in the prime of his youth, and he was willing to trade in his material body for a place in the spiritual world eventually. Maharaj Pariksit, who sat on the bank of the Ganges during the last 7 days of his life and heard Katha from Sukadeva Goswami. None of these had any desire to drag on in a material body in this material world. They closed in on the prime necessity of the human form of life, which is to go back to home, back to Godhead. And Prabhupada says the conditioned souls in this material world who are entrapped by the material energy hardly know the higher principles of life. Most of them are like animals. They're engaged in eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating, sense enjoyment, even under the pretension of religiosity, knowledge, or salvation. So our takeaway from this morning's gathering, our morning's discussion, is that not only were these great souls like Bali, like Pariksit Maharaj, like Arjuna and his brothers Yudhisthira, Kadvanga Maharaj, not only were they not interested in prolonging their life into ripe, decrepit old age, but they took the opportunity when it presented themselves in their youth, in their prime. They sacrificed everything temporal, everything material, including their bodies, in exchange for an eternal life in the kingdom of God. And in doing so, they set an example for people in general to follow. The problem is, as Prabhupada said, conditioned souls hardly know that we're spirit, that this world is not the real world, but we come from the spiritual world. We're all parts and parcels of God. We need to go back home, back to Godhead. Were it not for these great souls who step right into the middle of the purpose of the human form of life, we would not have any light. We would not have any direction. That's why at the beginning of the day of every Hare Krishna temple, we say, Vande Gurosi Sri Charanada Vindayam. I offer my humble respects unto the lotus feet of those great souls who have trod the path, guided the way, And I ask the Lord bless me to always remember their example and to always follow in their footsteps back to home, back to Godhead. More on this tomorrow, but thanks very much. Jaya Shri Radhe says she knows a lady who will be 103 this year. No special diet or activities. Met her 8 years ago when her daughter died. She wanted to die back then. She did not want to live to be 100, but she continues. She's almost deaf, but she can somehow or other hear me. Well, she has the great blessing of associating with the devotee of the Lord. So she gets both. She gets to live to be 100, and she gets good association as well. Thomas Edison brought all kinds of seeds from India to USA and planted them here in Florida. That's why we have so many banyan trees. Interesting comments. I can only see 4 comments at a time from where I'm pointed, or from my vantage point. But the 13 people who have liked, or how can I get them? 13. Okay, it's not coming down. I never know what's going to happen from one day to another. Usually when I click on this, there's a drop-down menu. How can I get them? Uh-oh, now I've got sound coming in. Okay, well, it looks like I'm not going to be able to share with you those who like. Thanks for joining us, Richard Vananath Boyden, and everybody else. I'm not able. I try to click on it, and it's actually not showing me. But thanks very much. If you haven't liked, go ahead and like, share. And join us tomorrow when we talk more about making the most of the valuable asset of the human form of life. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama,